Well, the Constitutional Court has now set aside an application to change the Firearms Control Act. This story follows the shooting at the school a few nights ago. This act currently requires people to renew their licenses 90 days before the expiration date. But the South African Hunters and Game Conservation Association, they wanted gun owners to be able to renew licenses even after the expiry date. So let's get some reaction to this particular court judgment. I'm joined on the line by police spokesperson Vish Naidu. Vish, good afternoon to you. As always, it's a pleasure speaking to you. What do you make of this application being set aside?
Very good afternoon to you, Gareth, and thank you for this opportunity. Well, of course, we really welcome this decision of the Constitutional Court. We pursued the High Court. We decided to appeal in our pursuance the High Court judgment because we were confident that our interpretation of Section 24 and 28 of the Firearms Control Act was indeed a correct interpretation. And of course, the Constitutional Court has proven us right once again, and therefore we welcome this decision. So, in view of this incident as well on the 16-year-old child that was killed apparently accidentally, what this renewal entailed is that every time someone applies for a renewal of the firearm, they have to go through a competency testing. So we have to see every 5 years that if this person, or 10 years, depending on the caliber or make of firearm the person has, if they are indeed competent enough to remain in possession of a firearm, a licensed firearm. So, apart from the fact that it helps us to really have a handle and to regulate the number of firearms that are in the country, it also helps us, as society to make sure that people are still competent enough to be in possession of a weapon of such a nature.
Vish, I'm going to ask you about the number of weapons in the country that we'll talk about in a moment. I would like to ask you about this. I'm not sure if you could hear the soundbite. We had Professor Sats Cooper, he's a clinical psychologist. He was saying he believes, and I quote this to you, Vish, tell me what you think. He believes it's time for people to be evaluated before being allowed to own firearms. Would you say that people are not being evaluated enough? Do you think enough is being done when evaluating someone who wants to purchase a gun?
Gareth, listen, I think the timing for this discussion, as appropriate as it may seem to some people, it might show a certain degree of insensitivity towards the child that was killed. Because if I had to say now that if you look at the number of accidents that happen compared to the number of firearms owners there are in the country, it's minuscule. It's absolutely, a very small fraction of incidents that actually happen of this nature. Let's put the crime side apart. Let's put the part where people get robbed and killed of firearms. When you're talking about clinical assessment of people, yes, of course, we'll welcome it. It will help us as the SAPS, to prevent such crimes or such incidents from taking place and so on and so forth. We would welcome that. But the competency testing, to a certain degree, it also looks at a person, an individual, how competent they are psychologically, physically, mentally, and so forth, to be allowed to be in possession of that firearm. But I'm not sure to what degree Professor Sats Cooper wants to extend this particular assessment to. But whatever it is, if it's going to help us in our course to prevent such incidents or accidents from taking place or criminality from taking place, of course we will welcome.
Let's talk about a question that many people have been asking. You just said in your comment back to me, Vish, that the timing to some people may be insensitive, considering the story that we were talking about earlier, not necessarily this amendment to the Firearms Control Act. And while I understand your link, I'm going to look at it as two slightly different things, if you'll allow me. The capacity of the police to take unlicensed firearms, SA Guns Free SA, I'm sure you're aware of them, say it's about 400,000 guns that are set to be destroyed. Are you confident that you can destroy this number of unlicensed firearms? And this also will, I imagine, lead to the question of amnesty at the moment for people who have unlicensed firearms.
Okay. You've just brought three things into one, but nevertheless, let me try and deal with them quickly and separately. Firstly, I really don't think it should be a concern the fact that people are in possession of the firearms after having not licensed them in terms of the law, in terms of Section 24 and 28 of the Firearms Control Act, renders them to be illegally in possession of those firearms. So basically what the judgment is saying that it would be unreasonable for us to prosecute somebody who comes and hands their firearms in voluntarily, right? But if we, as the police, find people in possession of those firearms, whether at home, in cars, or at the office, or whatever the case might be, then we cannot guarantee that they won't be prosecuted, because that won't be considered as voluntary surrender. That's one. Two, yes, the Gun Free or the Gun Association of South Africa, they are quite right. There are hundreds of thousands of people that fall within that category. But the matter doesn't matter. But the fact of the matter is that they now can be considered to be illegally in possession of the firearm, and they are required by law now to come and hand in those firearms. How we dispose of the firearm is entirely the responsibility of the South African Police Service, and we have plans in place. Now, when I said that you brought three into one, amnesty is something totally different. Now, remember, these are people that were waiting for an outcome of a court ruling, as opposed to those that are in possession of stolen firearms, firearms that were taken in hijackings and robberies and so on and so forth. Those people, that's a different category of amnesty. So we don't want people that are now in possession of firearms to wait for an amnesty period. We don't know when that's going to come, and they run the risk of, in that waiting period, being arrested and charged for not having handed in their firearms in terms of the Firearms Control Act.
Vish, I do, and thank you for the elaboration. As far as the issue we're talking about, the South African Hunters and Games Conservation Association, they wanted owners to be able to renew their licenses even after the expiry date. Is that still a possibility? Will they face a fine of some kind, even if it has expired? Can they keep the weapon? This is what they went to court for, or is there some kind of fine or penalty they'll have to face?
You know what, Gareth, I didn't see that in the ruling. Maybe I didn't read it it's maybe because I didn't read it in its entirety. But as far as I know, that they won't be allowed to. Because right now they are illegally in possession of those firearms. Because they haven't, in the first place, they haven't renewed, because there was this clarion call by this association for them not to renew in pursuance of asking the court to declare Section 24 and 28 unconstitutional, which they failed, in their bid. So they basically, in layman's terms, backed the wrong horse, so to speak.
Vish, I do. Thank you very much indeed for your time this afternoon. Very complex situation, and I'm sure we're going to get plenty more reaction from various sides on this. Vish Naidu, as always, it's a pleasure to have you on the phone speaking to us.
Thank
Police spokesperson Vish Naidu joining us here on Afternoon News.